let me have the honor, the distinct honor of introducing Dan. My name's Tim Kaysen. Dan Friedman, as many of you know, he's a distinguished professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, also affiliated now with the University of Essex. He's also the outgoing president of the ESA. Those of you who were at the members meeting saw him chair that. Well, Dan's known for many things over his long career: evolutionary game theory, learning, dynamics, market experiments, especially, which is something that I guess is the topic of today's talk. I can't really do justice to summarize his extensive and wide-ranging career, so I won't try to do that. Dan has had a remarkable run at the top of the profession for all these years. We were talking in the members meeting about publication trends in top 5 journals, and everyone's always keeps an eye on that. Dan has been publishing in these so-called top 5 journals for 5 different decades consistently. So we should all aspire for that consistent excellence. He published his first JPE paper in 1984. He's published his most recent JPE paper in 2021, and I'm sure there are many others to come in these leading journals. I'm going to pass it on to him in just a moment, but one other thing I wanted to mention is what a fantastic mentor Dan is, not only to his own students, and he's had many and been a great mentor to them, but also a mentor to students and young faculty at other institutions. I know this firsthand. I'm one of his oldest mentees, I guess you would say. He is a co-author essentially on one of the chapters of my dissertation, which I wrote at a different university than where he was at. And yes, Dan, that was over 30 years ago that we were taking walks in the Santa Cruz woods talking about these experiments. Anyway, I'm just one example of many mentees that Dan has worked with over his many decade career. So the most important thing about Dan is he's a wonderful human being, in addition to being a terrific researcher and great mentor. So with that, it's my great honor to pass it on to you, Dan, and very much looking forward to your talk today.
Well, thanks so much for your excessively kind introduction, Tim. Yeah, let me, Okay, I'm going to have to just scroll here, roll out my finger. There's many parts to this talk, but let me, since there's only a few minutes, let me zip along. This is the first of hopefully many presidential plenaries, an institution implemented by Catherine Eckel, and this is a launch, should have been last year, but we're going to do it now. I think very next year, Marie Claire will continue the tradition, and Charles Nasser. So in order to launch this, I need a grand theme, one that goes back to the roots of the Economic Science Association, indeed of economics, and that's the power and mystery of markets. Wish there was some way, see if I can do some way to scroll. I guess I'm stuck with scrolling. I have to apologize. It's a grand theme. I'll have to apologize in advance for oversimplifying and for neglecting major contributions by so many others. With only 50 minutes, I'll have to focus on what I know best and grossly overemphasize my co-authors' contributions and my own. Anyway, for markets and wealth creation, let me begin at the beginning. That's a famous book by Adam Smith. No, not Theory of Moral Sentiments. I'm talking about the Wealth of Nations. It was published in 1776, and that was an interesting time when wealth creation was accelerating in Adam Smith's part of the world. When Adam Smith was young, the population, say in Great Britain, was growing rapidly, but not real per capita GDP. However, from his youth up until 1776, the annual growth rate accelerated in per capita GDP. in a very visible sort of way, and accelerated thereafter. So that was what I think inspired him. And he believed, and many of us still agree, that markets played the central role in this accelerating wealth, growth of wealth. Now, there's the book he wrote. I happen to have a copy here. It's a fat book and far-ranging, but the central theme is how markets generate wealth. That was really what he was meditating on. And the central idea that he expressed is that the division of labor, as he called it, or we would say more generally, increasing returns to technology, and increasing returns to scale technologies, vastly increase productivity and thus wealth. But as Adam Smith says, the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. Markets somehow are limiting this. And it took me actually probably a couple of decades to really grasp that point. So let me try to give you my understanding of what's going on. In historical perspective, for the entire history of our planet in all times and all places, markets had some importance, but they're not the main thing. It's sort of like small ponds or creeks in a mainland terrain of the subsistence economy. So markets were really helpful for special things like, important things like tools or luxuries, but were not central to most daily lives. The vast majority of time that people spent throughout history up to Adam Smith's century was in work that would directly provide food for themselves and their families, and shelter and clothing for them and the people living right around them. This is subsistence. The modern world has the opposite economic geography, if I can use that metaphor. The point is the vast majority of work is to produce goods and services not for local consumption, but to be sold in the market to remote people. Probably you have no idea who they are, mostly for doing production, working with others to provide for strangers through the market. And in exchange for this kind of work, workers get an income, or wages or salary, and they use that to buy the necessities and luxuries in the market, drawing on the efforts of thousands of people from around the world. So a way to describe the modern world is that markets are like the ocean in which we all swim, not these little creeks or ponds. And Smith was writing about the transition from the subsistence economy to modernity in its early days of that transition. So here's the first mystery. This talk is advertised as Market Mysteries Old and New, and I've got 4 of them. Here's number 1. It's old, but it's also new. They're all both old and new, these mysteries. Why did it work that way? Why didn't the transition begin centuries earlier? Maybe in some different place and some different time. And as transitions unfolded around the world, sometimes it was delayed. For example, in China before 1978 was a very slow transition away from subsistence. But sometimes it's accelerated. Meiji Japan was maybe one of the first to go modernity, and starting in the late 1800s at warp speed. And China, post 1978, has also seen accelerated transition of modernity. And was expanding a bit. Why is it so irresistible in one way, this transition to modernity? Let me pose this mystery more generally. The mystery is, how do markets catalyze the transformation to modernity that's dominated our world? There are many famous investigations of this mystery, but in lack of modesty, let me mention a less famous one, chapter 3 of my 2008 book. The idea is that you've got dual feedback. Well, here's how markets catalyze this transformation. You have a positive dual feedback. I'm thinking sort of evolutionary terms. On the one hand, you have production technology and also transportation communication. And there's a positive feedback from markets to spur developments of the technology, and developments of that technology in turn expand markets and spur them. So you got a positive feedback there. And then you got another one on the other side with political and legal institutions, where institutions that support the market do better and are reinforced, and those in turn build a market. So you have this dual positive feedback loop, and that's what drives the transition. I don't have a formal model of that, but I described that and why that would work in the particular time and place that it did in chapter 3 of that book. Those are really important big questions, and I said lots of people have had really interesting things to say about it, but today I want to focus more on the inner workings of markets rather than the impact they have on society as a whole. But keeping in mind in the background that that's why we're especially interested in markets. So what's the inner workings of markets? Well, Wealth of Nations famously introduces the invisible hand to guide self-interested buyers and sellers to socially desirable outcomes. Sellers are competing with each other to offer better value packages to buyers, and the buyers compete with each other to acquire the most desirable package. This kind of competition may lead to competitive equilibrium, at which point social value is maximized. Only the most efficient producers get to sell, only the most urgent consumers get to buy. And the best thing about it, of course, is that it competitive equilibrium responds to any sort of change in seller cost or buyer benefits and maintain maximal efficiency. So competitive equilibrium is a wonderful idea, but here's the mystery. Is competitive equilibrium actually ever attained, or at least approximated? And if so, how? Because Adam Smith doesn't explain exactly how, nor do others. And if it fails to be attained, how? Well, there was a consensus back when I was a graduate student. The Cowles Foundation was sort of the leading consensus among theorists, and there was this notion of institution-free theory. And they said, yeah, some of my professors might have said, yeah, we understand about when you can attain competitive equilibrium. What it takes is a whole lot of small agents that are fully informed. And that's the way the theory was sort of set up. And, with that basically monopoly power, market power would disappear at a relatively slow rate as the number of small agents increased. Of course, there's some conceptual issues that were more or less admitted. This notion of competitive equilibrium is everyone's a price taker, but if everyone's a price taker, who sets and adjusts the price? Some empirical thinking, Edwin Chamberlain, I think, deserves credit for running the first pedagogical test. He was doing it, I think, mainly to promote his pet model, an alternative to competitive equilibrium that we even now know as monopolistic competition. One of his students took this idea seriously and pushed it a little further. Vernon Smith, in early work after he graduated from Harvard, where Chamberlain taught, working at Purdue mainly, at Tim's school, took this idea of doing labs and imposed the idea of stationary repetition and salient payments, but most importantly for today, he used a robust market institution, that continuous double auction. And he obtained mystifyingly good results. This idea of a scientific mystery, this is Vernon Smith's phrasing for what he found. He found that competitive equilibrium was a very good description of what he saw in the lab, but it was only for like a handful of buyers, one handful of buyers, another handful of sellers, and they had only private information, not what anybody was expecting. And when I heard about it, I thought it was probably nonsense. I didn't really believe it when I was a graduate student. I had tried myself. Let me talk a little bit about the continuous double auction market that seems maybe responsible for this magic, or at least so I thought for quite a while. It's widely used in financial markets and commodities market, processes limit orders, bids and asks in real time. Here's something from a paper with Tim, actually, from the 90s, showing the time on this axis. And we had, I think, a bunch of buyers, a bunch of sellers. who had random values and random costs, and here's the best bid, first bid by buyer 10, bested by a bid by buyer 7, and buyer 6 goes a little better, buyer 5. Anyway, there's these bidders are outbidding each other, sellers are undercutting each other, and then at this point in time, about 45 seconds in, a seller who hadn't been active jumps in, steals the deal from buyer 5, and there's a transaction at this price. The process continues. Seller 1 and seller 3 are vying with each other. Buyer 7 is kind of conceding, and then buyer 8 comes in and gets the deal from seller 3, and then seller 1 and buyer 7 get together shortly thereafter at about the same price, and that's it. There are no more transactions that period, although some buyers try to do it. So that's a real-time process, and it seems remarkably efficient in our experiment, as well as numerous others over the years. So the mystery is to refine the mystery a little bit. Why does the continuous double auction work so well? How does it evade these problems having to do with market power, the inefficiencies foreseen by the by Couch Foundation theorists? There are some theoretical papers, easily in Ledyard. Actually, they started long before '93. Understood the role. They had a model to explain the role of stationary repetition, how you could get convergence across periods if they were all the same in terms of stationary repetition. Goad and Sunder have a what they call a zero intelligence model, which shows how robots, artificial agents, can approximate competitive equilibrium without using any strong notion of rationality, just a no loss constraint and the rules of the continuous double auction. They could do that within a single period. Bob Wilson wrote down a perfect, incomplete information model called the waiting game Dutch auction model of very elaborate and even by today's standards, sophisticated model. He was only able to find necessary conditions, not sufficient conditions. So it's a incomplete theory, but found that perfect Bayesian equilibrium strategies could approximate competitive equilibrium within a single period through this waiting game Dutch auction approach. I had offered a different approach in 2 articles, which I'm called Bayesian Game Against Nature, which is basically learning and updating from watching the bids and asks of others, but imagining as if it was a nature process, not a strategic process, in order to approximate competitive equilibrium within a single period. This general kind of approach was refined by Steve Jerstad and Dick Howitt, and in 98 and later papers. There are a number of empirical comparisons. Tim and I did a couple, one with pre-existing data, another with new data. And our study and others find a mix of all the models I mentioned. They all do reasonably well in some aspect. The most recent one I saw was just published last year using MobLab data. Again, these different approaches, none of them seems to explain all the data. Each of them can explain some little piece of it. So the point is there's lots of improvement. This is not like a solved mystery. There's lots of improvement, room for improving the predictive power of competitive double auction. In terms of where the inefficiencies are and what the price and transaction patterns are. But we shouldn't, continuous double auction is kind of a trap in a way because it's so complicated, very hard to model in detail, just because the strategy space is huge, and also what the equilibrium notion is somewhat problematic. But we shouldn't obsess on it. There's a wider question, which I'll call market mystery 3B. And I think this is the important question we should be thinking about, especially as experimentalists. Which market formats work well and why? This is really a major question for our age, as I'll say more about later. So Besides a continuous double auction, probably the best known market institution is a call market. It's one that economic theorists are close to their heart, and it's used in practice fairly often as well. And this, it's not a real-time process. It's a one-shot where all the participating buyers submit bids, which are sorted into a demand curve from high to low. And all the participating sellers submit asks, limit orders on how much they're willing to accept, sorted from lowest to highest. And where they cross and the overlap, take the midpoint of the overlap, that's a clearing price. And all the units are traded, the interim marginal units are traded at that price. This is amenable to theoretical analysis, and there's a paper by, well, a number of papers by Steve Williams and various co-authors. Probably the best known one is Rustakini and Satterthwaite, that show that this market institution converges to efficiency much faster than that was presumed in the Cowles approach. Exponent 4 times as large. Tim and I tested this one too, and the results are somewhat equivocal. This equilibrium doesn't fully explain what's going on. The learning seems to play an important role. One paper I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on here, if I can afford the time, is a paper I wrote with theorist Joe Ostroy, who was looking at an institution-free incomplete information theory that predicted if you induced demand like this and supply like this, you'd have a very inefficient outcome because everybody would want to withhold the quantity to push the price in their direction. So we tested this in the lab. I conjectured that with a continuous double auction, you'd still get pretty efficient results, but maybe not with a call market. And Joe was convinced that you would get inefficient results no matter what the institution, that these structural parameters were the story, and institutions didn't matter so much, market institutions. Well, we were both wrong. We got pretty highly efficient, not super efficient, but remarkably highly efficient outcomes in both the call market and even more so in continuous double auction. And this picture shows what's going on. The dark lines are the actually revealed demand and supply, and you'll see there's not that much withholding in terms of quantity, but there is quite a bit in terms of price. Really what you end up doing is presenting a very elastic schedules to the other side of the market. So this price, as opposed to quantity under revelation, seems to be the rule in call markets, and we did some follow-ups, talking about a theory that supports that, drawing on previous literature, and running an experiment to verify that that theory really accounted for what we saw. But the insight there is that it's price under revelation and not quantity under revelation that supports competitive equilibrium. And arguably, although it's hard to model in detail, the incentives to under-reveal price are even stronger for the continuous double auction. So we consider this an important clue for solving the mystery, market mystery number 3. I should mention there's very recent work by Sabiu and Vernon, which takes a related, although not identical, view on these matters. Okay, I've got 2 more general topics I want to do in my time remaining. One of them is about general equilibrium. So I want to say that let's go beyond looking at these partial equilibrium stair-step kind of economies of a single isolated market and think about the way markets interact with each other or multiple goods. General equilibrium is a traditional name for these questions. There's many of us who always thought that those are the real kind of markets, but that we want to do, we want to experiment and really understand. But it's hard to bring these markets to the lab. In particular, it's easy to induce stair-step partial equilibrium preferences and costs, values and costs, but general equilibrium preferences is more of a challenge. Also, the market formats you need are more challenging. So there's maybe 2 handfuls of papers over all the years on this. Probably the plurality is by Charlie Plott and numerous co-authors. And they've dealt with this by looking at accessible but interesting special cases. For example, Leontief preferences over subsets of goods. Those are relatively easy to induce, and you can learn a fair amount from that. I have a recent paper with Sean and Ryan where we avoided induced preferences altogether to make some other points. But I would say the previous state of the art was Steve Dristad's 2013 way of inducing induced preferences using a lookup table. So one of the things I want to sort of recent developments I want to leave you with is this more visual way of looking at markets. So general equilibrium markets, so call this texty. I think Ryan Opria is the one that let's focus on this side of the screen now. I don't know how well you can see it, but you can type in a price and a quantity. For general equilibrium, it's important to be able to do a quantity. The price is the number of units of the X good per unit of Y good. You type in price quantity, and then it shows up in the heat map. I'll say more about that in a minute. You click the ask button and it goes into the order queue. And these are ranked, of course, from lowest price to highest price. And we're ranked number 2. Ours is color coded here. Likewise for bids, you enter a price of quantity, hit the bid button, it goes in the queue. Ours is ranked last at this point here. Now, in order to induce preferences, the way that we're doing that was with a heat map, color coded for the payoffs. So it centers, there's a black dot at the current allocation. So this player at the moment, this trader at the moment has this many units of the X good, this many of the Y good. And the utility level, which is shown in text here, is shown by this indifference curve. And they understand that the further up they get this way, the higher the payoff, the higher that their utility and their ultimate payment. And they can see when they put in a bid or ask, they can see where that would take them if it were accepted. But it's mainly relying on the text version here, okay? So that's, I guess, a small advance on the current state of the art. The one that I'm really enthusiastic about, though, drops all this text entry and turns it into a video game. So here's a close-up. So to play this kind of market, you don't need to type in anything. All you need is to point and click. Here's the indifference curve that I showed you before. This quadrant here is where you're buying X and giving up some Y, and here's where you're selling X and paying for it with Y. There's the same bid and ask that you're offering to other people. Ask and bid. Now, what's different about this is that the order book is displayed as this piecewise linear frontier. So if you want to buy more, you look at what's other players are asking. The best ask, that is the lowest price ask, is shown as this line segment here. It's this quantity of X for a price that would involve, paying that much Y. The next best ask is this segment here, this quantity at price given by this slope, and then the worst ask in the order book is here. So those are your opportunities, and you could click on here and get that, but that's not a good idea because it would take you low on a difference curve. On the other hand, accepting the bids in the market, I'll rate again in a similar way. Just by clicking, you can move. I didn't have time doing animation here, but that would jump you. If you clicked here and confirmed, then your endowment point would move to here, and it'd be a higher level of indifference. So it's a live action video game where these frontiers are changing as other players change their bids and ask and accept. And so the point is that it speeds up general equilibrium exchange by, I don't know, maybe 10 to 100 times. So here's a question. Are there major performance difference in this video game version of continuous double auction compared to the text version? Or more generally, which variants in market format make a difference? For example, showing a full order book versus just best bid and offer, a full transactions history versus only on, one extreme of the kind of market that Chamberlain did versus what Vernon Smith did. Whether you do a call market repeated quickly, from what Tim and I called multiple call markets, or now it's called a frequent batch auction, versus a continuous, truly real-time, continuous double auction. A related question is maybe whether simulations of various degrees of sophistication can capture the difference in performance across the different market institutions. So these are questions ongoing right now. Brett Williams, a PhD student here at Santa Cruz, will be on the market next year, is pursuing this in his dissertation, some of this by himself and some jointly with me. We're not the only ones. I should mention, besides people I've mentioned already, Heinrich Nax, John Ledyard, and Jasmina Riffelbeck, among others, are pursuing questions of this sort. Tim, do I have time for one more market mystery?
Yeah, you've got about 13 minutes, or no, you've got almost 20 minutes
Great.
for Q&A. Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so the final market mystery, again old but new, is about financial markets. These do play a leading role in, I mean, part of modernity really is financial markets. They have an exalted mission. The financial markets are how a modern economy channels resources to the best ideas for creating wealth, for down the road. And to find those best ideas, financial markets must aggregate dispersed private information. They actually do more than that. They would motivate people to come up with ideas and motivate other people to investigate those ideas and put their bets behind them. But those bets, by participating in the financial market, must somehow aggregate this dispersed private information. And our society, modern market economies rely on this. But whether they do a good job or not so good has always been controversial. Theory, I guess Eugene Fama's 1970 classic paper describing strong form asset market efficiency, meaning full aggregation of dispersed private information, is the benchmark. Questions whether that's what we see. There's a lot of interesting other relevant theory which says, there are obstacles. Grossman and Stiglitz are explaining why, there might be, if markets do such a great job of aggregating private information, then that undercuts the incentive to create such information. Milgram and Stokey have some no trade results. Kyle resolved some of these theoretically to some degree in a couple of papers that apply to different kind of market institutions. Anyway, there's a lot of interesting theory that bears on this question of financial markets aggregating private information. There's also a long tradition of laboratory market experiments. Early papers are Plot and Sunder also plot with Forsyth and Palfrey, and about the same time that first JPE paper that Tim mentioned, I came up with John Salmon and Glenn Harrison. There was a little gap between that JPE paper and the recent one with Tim. Anyway, there's a long tradition of laboratory experiments that do this, and there's been a lot of progress in this mystery, but it's not like there's definitive answers. It's still a deep question and mystery of how well financial markets can aggregate information when they go astray. What I want to emphasize on the last part of my talk is that this seems to be an especially urgent question right now, just in the last few years. I see the competitive, continuous double auction format. It's been dominant in major financial markets for a century and a half, but I think it might be breaking down now under the weight of new technology. Now, the definitive aspect of continuous double auction markets is that there's strict price time priority. You compete on price. If there's a tie in price, then the first player gets priority, first one there. Now, that's not a problem if you have continuous prices, and you can just barely beat somebody in price. But financial markets aren't like that. All of them have discrete price grids. And so in a very active and important market, the adjacent grid points are where the activity is. And as a result, there's lots of ties on price. Pretty much all the transactions, well, a large majority of transactions, the price is tied and the transaction goes to the first one there. So time is almost infinitely divisible, and even a microsecond, the time that it takes this light to go between my two fingers, a microsecond of time advantage could make a difference in who gets the deal and who steals the deal and makes the money. And indeed, there's a major industry now that dissipates tens of billions of dollars in speed rents. And the bigger worry among many regulators in Europe, US, Brazil, around the world, is that there's high frequency traders that are competing on microsecond time advantages. That kind of competition might impair information aggregation or destabilize markets. The evidence is mixed, and some of the reform suggestions may cause more problems than others. I want to mention the three main reform proposals as we see it, we being work ongoing with my colleague at Santa Cruz, Christian Lopez Vargas, also with Peter Crampton and Axel Ockenfels. We have a project to investigate what we see as a leading alternatives to continuous double auction in this financial markets with high frequency trading. Investors exchange frequent batch auction are relatively small. I say in some sense less ambitious, but it's important. But I want to focus in the few minutes I have left on Kyle-Lee flow markets, which is a proposal to enable nearly continuous prices and gradual allocation adjustments. So here's a quick sketch. The idea on this kind of market is a really new and radical, in my mind, very promising 21st century kind of market institution. It virtually eliminates the incentives for these very high frequency traders and also for what's called order fragmentation. And the idea is to execute orders gradually at finite rates per second. So a standard order in this kind of market includes a direction as usual, buy or sell, a maximum quantity, more or less as usual. What's the total number of shares you want to transact at most? Then instead of just a single price, you name a maximum rate at which you're willing to transact, and there's a speed limit. You can do it at the as fast as possible, or you can do it arbitrarily slowly. And you name a price range over which at one end, the maximum price, the more aggressive price, you want maximum speed, and then at the other end, it tapers to zero linearly. And these could be grid points, to conform with current practice. So the idea is the market clears continuously in flow rates at piecewise constant prices. I'm going to show you an animation here just based on the following four orders. I'll let the orders come in one at a time and not let the market start until all there, just so you can see what's going on better. Although, of course, the market could run and will run at the same time orders are appearing and being canceled and so on. So the first order is going to be a bid for a large quantity, relatively unaggressive price, and a slow rate. The second one will be a more aggressive bid, smaller quantity, but a more aggressively priced, a wider width, which is, I guess, less aggressive, and a twice as fast a maximum rate. And then I'll come in with two asks, again, one larger and less aggressive, and a smaller one, just for the purpose of illustration. So I gotta stop this screen share, and I gotta hope I can get this to work. Let's see. Let's see, so can you see this screen?
Yes, we can.
Very good. So What I have here is I'm going to have here's the 4 traders, their initial holdings of cash and inventory. I'm going to choose the file with the orders, the 4 orders on it that I just described. And those are the 2 bids coming in. One at maximum rate 1 and the other one at maximum rate 2. Now the asks are coming in. Actually, they both come in now. So with those 4 orders, I haven't started the market yet. With those 4 orders, there's a maximum. The flow rate is a little bit over 2 shares per second, or whatever the and a price of a little under 11. Okay, so that's the rate at which that's where these cross. So if you're ready, I'll start the market and it'll start executing these orders, and you can watch what happens. The flows will appear here in the trader's cash and inventory. So I rescaled the thing. That's what happened first. Let me pause it for a second here. You can see that Trader 1 has executed a little bit. They've lost from 5,000. They've lost a little bit of inventory. I mean cash. They paid out a little bit of cash. Trader 1 has paid out more cash. Trader 2 has acquired, and Trader 3 have both acquired cash in a fair amount, and their inventories have gone in the other direction. And one of the orders fully executed. So now we're, I guess the most urgent seller is fully executed, and their orders disappeared. And then the price jumped back, jumped to, and now it's a higher price where the flow supply and flow demand intersect. And let me continue the simulation here. You can see the inventories are moving. This trader is out of it, but the others, oh, and there we go. These orders are now fully executed, and everybody's got their orders. But being just a split second being in front of the other is not only going to make a split second's difference, because these are going at a finite rate. If I've got time, maybe I'll send another ask in from Trader 3 and let the thing continue. So a new order came in. Let me resume. Of course, you don't have to actually stop it. So you can see there. Well, that order is finally fully executed, and that's it again. And so nothing more would happen until another order arrives. Let me go back to my last few slides here. If I can find them.
Dan, you've got about 6 minutes before we want to do the Q&A.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. Okay. There it is. Okay, so that's the again, and you can see again the orders we just looked at being executed in the flow market. Anyway, the last thing I want to say, that's my substance. I wanted to advertise those 2 innovations. So my last comments are, there's a bit of a pep talk. I think I really believe that the golden age of market design is just upon us, just starting now. There's certainly impressive developments recognized by the Nobel Committee to Al Roth and his co-authors in that community for what they call matching markets, or sometimes also called assignment problems. But there's markets with prices are even larger and evolving quickly, especially in emerging economies, online economies, financial markets. I think there's a huge amount of action there. The mysteries of how markets work, when they work, how they might go awry, those mysteries deepen as we learn more. But we have opportunity to do more now too. There's new tools to deploy. I just showed you 2 that I'm particularly enthusiastic about in terms of laboratory software. But there's also theoretical and empirical developments that can be brought to bear on this question. So let me just wind up by saying there's lots of opportunities for new thinking about these market mysteries. Thanks so much. Any comments that you can't get in now, you can send to me, to email at me. I have an easy email. I plan to be there for the interaction of presenters at a social event 4 hours from now. And my lab website, you can download many of the papers. I'll put these slides up, and they include references to most of the papers that I talked about. So thanks so much for your patience, and I'm happy to field some questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dan. Let's open up the floor for questions. Feel free to just unmute yourself and ask away. It looks like Charles has raised his hand first.
Yeah, I have a question I'd like to ask to start off about your work on general equilibrium on the multiple markets together with a new graphical interface, which I think is wonderful. It's really going to advance research in that area. But I guess my question is about the philosophy of that work. So do you view the interface, the kind of easy to use interface, as essential for testing the question, what do markets go to competitive equilibrium when you have multiple goods, when you have general equilibrium? Or is it is the idea more of a market design question that does the interface make the market more efficient? So I'm kind of wondering what the agenda behind the development of the new tools is.
Yeah, I see those as two sides of the same coin, Charles. I think the practical matter of developing new markets that work particularly well, we want to try everything, and including some of these new video game type technologies, because maybe it'll help. But the other side, as a theorist, I mean, for that practical question, I think it's very important that we have a better theory. It's engineering, but also, the science behind it, in order to understand what is it about markets that makes them work well or makes them fall on their face. What really matters? That's a scientific question, and these are just one of tools. In order to answer that question, you have to try a lot of things, and then make theories about, well, this is what'll matter, and then try to create new things that will test those theories, those stress test those theories, and so we have a more solid theory. So if I understand your question correctly, the answer is both.
Great, thanks.
So Dan, I can jump in with a quick question. How do you see the trade-offs, to address some of these market mysteries, the trade-offs between studying markets that are realistic in terms of the institutional properties and so forth? This applies to auctions as well. So, auctions in practice sometimes are much more complex than we can model theoretically. So the realistic setting versus studying things that are tractable theoretically. I suppose the answer is both, but I don't know what your perspective on the trade-offs of realism versus something that we can speak more easily to theorists about.
Yeah, well, let's see. And first of all, let me say, in terms of practice, there are some areas where practice is established and, is not going to change. And so understanding exactly that is important. I see markets, though, I really believe we're in a golden age where all kinds of new stuff is going to happen. In auctions, there have been some, like spectrum auction, had never been seen before. So if you would constrain yourself to pre-existing practice, you would have missed that. But yeah, to speak to theory, the key for a laboratory experiment is to be able to simplify down to just a few key dimensions. And so personally, I'm interested in looking at the simplest versions I can find of these things. The high frequency trading project is uncomfortably complicated, because in order to do some of these markets, I didn't talk about the IEX and the FBA. These are pretty complicated institutions, and you need to have automated traders, and so we've simplified it into allow humans to control moderately complicated robots that participate in these markets. But I think the real art for experiment, or at least for the kind of brand of experiment that I particularly enjoy, is to think about stuff in the real world, think about what's going on in theory, and find a way to strip down to do as simple an experiment as possible. In the case of market institutions, maybe something unrealistically simple that will shed light on the questions of interest, and in turn will have hopefully an impact in the more complicated world. That's a long answer to the question. I hope I touched on what you had in mind.
Thanks. Thanks. Other questions? Marika?
Yes, Dan, it was very fascinating. But could you say more about the behavioral biases that traders have, and what do you think is the most problematic bias in these type of markets, in these continuous auction markets?
If it's just simple supply and demand, there's some, I don't know, important. For example, yeah, I see a slight asymmetry that people are more aggressive and more active in the buyer role. They're more apt to put up bids than asks. I'm not sure why. It's not true of all subject pools, but many subject pools, you see more action on that side. It doesn't seem to make that much difference in the simple settings. Information aggregation, though, I think that's a place where behavioral biases, cognitive biases may play an important role. And in my mind, one of the important questions is whether certain market institutions will help people overcome cognitive biases. So, for example, there may be overconfidence. With a graduate student, I'm looking at some information aggregation where overconfidence may play a role. And the answers are it seems that markets can help to some degree, but anyway, it's early days. There seem to be some real limitations in how much markets can overcome thinking that your information is more important than information that other people might have, what you might infer from other people's trades. There may be some systematic underweighting of that, but I can't say that for sure. But I think that's the kind of thing we could use a lot more investigation, a lot more people looking at. Yeah, that's a really deep question, Marie Claire. There's this huge disconnect between, there was a controversy between the Nobel Prize, where Vernon Smith got the Nobel Prize, but also Danny Kahneman. Exemplify this dichotomy between, on the one hand, an individual choice. You have, rampant, the Kahneman-Tversky program and others following it, showing major departures from rationality, whereas Vernon Smith's work was showing that, perfectly rational, economic equilibrium predicted well in markets, and trying to resolve the two, reconcile those two things. There's a lot of depth there. And I think particularly this comes to its place center stage when you're thinking about information aggregation.
Hi, Dan. I have a question.
Hi, Jim.
How you doing?
Well, I'm slowly waking up.
Yeah, me too. So one question I have is whether, those who have been around for a long time have thought and focused on the role of information aggregation and how we teach double auctions to our students, and where the information can only be aggregated through bids and offers in the market. But we've all been reading a lot recently about the trades generated by social media that has produced bizarre price changes on the stock exchange. And so information is now being transmitted and aggregated outside the markets and then feeding back with having huge implications for market prices. I wonder if you see some new research topics there, and perhaps in the 21st century, we need to change our traditional view about markets aggregating information as opposed to information outside the markets feeding into the markets.
That's an interesting thought, Jim. I think that's a nice research idea that hopefully some people in this audience will pursue. The way I think about information aggregation in the markets is there's information is out there, good, bad, or indifferent, hopefully good. And the markets are going to some degree, not 100%, aggregate whatever is out there for whatever reason. But you're talking about not taking as exogenous the information that's out there, to put in part of this, make endogenous, social media and other things that are creating information of in this case dubious quality, but that does seem to have some impact on certain prices. I'm not sure in the long run how huge this is, but it's certainly for was it GameStop and a couple others, at least for over a medium range of a couple of months, played a huge role. And I don't know of anyone who's investigating this in the lab to get more insight into to what extent it's possible and how far it can go. It's a great idea, one that I hadn't thought of. Since we've been giving tributes to mentors, I want to say that the first conversation I had that made me think, yeah, maybe I want to actually get into ESA and experimental economics was with Jim and Vernon standing together. I asked them a few questions and got really deep into in some meetings once. So I think of Jim in some ways as one of my mentors, or at least encouraging senior statesmen. And he's going to keep going at least as long as I do on this. So great to see you, Jim. And that's another great research idea.
Well, we'll try to keep up with you guys as you continue doing this. That's a great way to wrap things up. I think we have about a minute and a half before the top of the hour where sessions are starting and people are going to be scrambling off to give their papers. So I guess let me encourage the audience to thank Dan for this thought-provoking talk, and also his great leadership of the ESA over the last several years. So thanks, everyone.